The 19th century saw the beginning of urban reform called progressivism, bringing about lots of reform projects in areas such as city beautification, civil service, government, and social reform. In the end of the 1800s and beginning of the 1900s, America heavily relied on immigrants as it industrialized. In this era, America gained immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe for the first time, specifically Italy and Russia. In this time period, immigrants mainly lived in crowded urban tenements that were unsanitary and sometimes unsafe. However, they created their own institutions to survive and ultimately established their own subculture as they also adapted to American culture in some ways. Immigrants in this time period were more co-optive than the heavily emphasized American individualism, causing their lifestyles to be viewed negatively by white Americans at the time. Immigrants also provided a bulk of the labor in industrialization and fought back against repressive labor laws by participating in unions. It was hard to develop social reform in this time because the government was small and unable to implement or enforce social programs. Additionally, due to the Depression of the 1890s, many people lost trust in corporations and industrialization. The Progressive Era marks the beginning of widespread regulatory reform in America. This included regulations for safe work environments, labor laws, protections for women and children, and began the development of a social work profession. However, these regulations did not include anything about giving money or resources to poor communities. Contemporary social and policy workers see that these reforms did not require government expenditures, which is reflective of the reluctant welfare state of the time and unwillingness to aid the poor. Progressives of this era believed that their regulations would bring dramatic change, but they failed to realize that many state and local governments completely lacked the funds to enforce the new regulations at all. They suffered from both legal and procedural bias, which led them to think that just the existence of the new laws would change people's behavior, and that the laws would make the government respond to the needs of the people as well. In reality, both of these things were unlikely as the reforms failed to address the actions of the powerful, landlords, politicians, and industrialists. Neither political party addressed the needs of the poor in their platform, thus it was hard to get the government to rally around social change. In 1912, the Progressive Party selected former Republican Teddy Roosevelt as its candidate thanks to the advocacy of Jane Addams, who believed that America could only collectively progress if it had a cohesive welfare state. However, this move actually won the election for Democrats because it caused progressive votes to split between Republicans and progressive. In this era, many minority groups were heavily oppressed, including women, African Americans, Asian immigrants, and the Spanish speaking population. They were provided low wages and poor living conditions, but rarely had the means to produce anything better for themselves. Even though these people performed the bulk of industrial labor, racism was still prominent, and many white Americans wanted immigration by these populations to be very restricted, leading to the creation of the Immigration Restriction League to find ways to limit immigration from these countries. In this kind of racist climate, it was hard to find support for social change, but Jane Addams did not give up. She and her allies were resilient in raising funds for social reform and continuing to push progressivism even in the rise of conservatism, making her way ahead of her time in her progressive beliefs. This is where we see the emergence of social workers, as Addams and their allies realized that these reforms could not be enforced without someone to do the job. As the profession developed, it became clear that not everyone agreed on how social work should be done, how the funds should be collected, and how to decide who is worthy or unworthy of help, among other things. It was still unclear at this time how the profession would ultimately develop, but it is because of this era that initial reforms were created that would greatly shape today's American welfare state.